Wood burners are a popular choice in the UK for heating and ambience, but they come with responsibilities to ensure your home remains safe. Joining us today is John, a fire safety expert with extensive experience in helping homeowners minimize while enjoying the benefits of wood burners. Welcome, John, and thanks for joining us today.
That's a pleasure.
So, John, could you start by telling us a little bit about your background in fire safety and how it relates to wood burners?
Well, I installed my first wood burner in 1978.
Wow.
And I have been involved in putting stoves into houses or into boats, into wagons, in one capacity or other ever since then. When you've got that many installations with your name on them, you have to know that they are safe.
So what are the most common risks associated with a wood burner in your home?
If I was to choose one aspect of safety to do with stoves, it comes down to the fuel you burn. It's so important that you burn properly seasoned dry wood, because if you don't, you won't necessarily see the difference. The wood might feel a little heavier. If you don't, then what you're doing, you're burning a lot of water off as the fire's going, and that ends up putting tars and condensates in your chimney, and that is what can lead to a chimney fire.
So what should homeowners be looking for in a qualified installer for their wood burning stove?
Okay, so if you're inviting somebody to come in and install your stove, first step is obviously to check that they are properly qualified. Really, you want them to be part of a competent person scheme, such as a scheme run by HETAS, and there are other groups that run such schemes. And that means that they've been through the necessary training, that they've had jobs inspected, so they have got the experience. And it also means that they can sign off the job themselves without you having to go to your local building control. So they are deemed to be a competent person, they are deemed to know what they're talking about, and they can say, yes, this is safe, this complies with the regulations, and I can sign it off myself. But the best thing is always, as with any trade, it's the conversation you have with your installer. You know, you can ask them about other jobs they've done. You pick up a feel for the experience that they've got. You're not after somebody who's going to cut corners. You're not after somebody who's going to do it badly because it's a cheaper job. You're after a safe and legally compliant installation.
So when you're looking at buying an actual wood burning stove, the actual unit itself, are there any safety features that you should be looking for on that burner?
Wood burners have come a long way in the time that I've been working with wood burners. And these days, unless you're buying something really cheap and nasty from a dubious source, you are almost certainly going to be getting something that's well built and it is safe. There's a lot of testing that goes on with wood burners. They're tested for efficiency, they're tested for safety, all that sort of thing will have been done. My own personal take, the first thing I would look at is the door. Take hold of that door handle, feel whether when you open it and then close it again, is it a positive closure? Does it feel like it's closed and going to stay closed? Equally, when you take hold of that handle, when it's very hot, the stove is hot, is that handle going to be hot? Are you going to need to put a glove on to open it or close it? Or does it have a genuinely stay cool handle? The other thing that I quite like to see on a stove is some sort of log guard at the front. Something that, so if you open the door of the stove and look at it, when your wood is in there, you've got quite a few logs in there. If you were to open it before those logs are burnt right down, I don't want those logs to be able to roll forward. So you want something, either a bar or a guard, or that the fire bed is set down enough so that any fire is contained, your burning wood is contained there. But generally, stoves are very good quality these days. They're well thought out.
So the all-important aspect of actually cleaning your chimney flues, how often should that be happening?
The rule of thumb is that you clean a chimney every year. There is certainly no harm in doing it more often than that. The thing to do is, when you've had your stove installed, when you get your first chimney, the first time your chimney is swept, look at what's come down. If there's a lot of stuff come down, then maybe you should be sweeping your chimney more often. Also look at what is coming down. Again, we go back to the idea that if your wood is not properly seasoned, you can be putting tar up your chimney. That tar will ultimately dry off, and you can see it comes down as shiny bits in when the chimney is swept. Although equally, a lot of it will stick to the inside of the chimney, and that is what shouldn't be happening. But the rule of thumb is once a year, but certainly no harm in twice a year. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, well, I've used the stove so little, I burn very dry wood." But one also has to remember, you're not just sweeping the chimney to clear out any soot. You're also sweeping the chimney to check there's no blockage in there. Yeah. We have certainly around here and in a lot of parts of the country, very active jackdaws. I have actually given the jackdaws one of my chimneys, a redundant chimney. They were born in there, they feel a right to nest in there, but they will try and nest in other chimneys. And their way of creating a nest is they go to the top and they keep dropping twigs down until one lodges, and then the next one builds, and they can build up a nest. So you don't know that you haven't had a jackdaw there lobbing twigs down your chimney. So it's good. Sweep come what may.
So we've mentioned burning kiln-dried logs, or the driest possible logs as possible, with the lowest possible moisture content. Is there any types of firewood that's better to burn than others? And are there certain things that you should definitely not burn?
You definitely shouldn't be burning things like chipboard, anything that might have a bonding agent, some chemicals on it. Painted wood is not a good idea. Tannalized timber is not a good idea. A badly remembered poem, I think, ends with the last line of something along "Elm, it burns like churchyard mould," or something like that. It is elm will burn, but it doesn't burn as well as others. You can burn hardwood and you can burn softwood. Just be burning dry wood.
So in terms of wood storage, I know a lot of people store their firewood quite close to the actual wood burner. Is there a rule as to how close or how far it should actually be, or should it just not be stored there at all?
Just not next to the stove. I mean, that there's no chance that the wood can move, can roll, can lean against the stove. You don't want that wood getting hot. It is a good idea to bring the next couple of nights' wood in for a final drying off, but no, don't be tempted to stack it next to the stove. It's all about the distance from the stove to combustible material, and adding in a very combustible material right next to the stove is absolutely a no-no.
So what is the minimum distance, or is there a minimum distance that is actually permissible?
Okay, every stove is tested to find its minimum distance to combustibles.
Okay.
So that's the safe distance that it should be away. So when you install a stove, if there's woodwork or anything around, you can see in the manual, it quite clearly states how far it needs to be from combustible material at the sides, at the back, and at the front.
Staying on the theme of safety, what kind of smoke alarms or carbon monoxide detectors should homeowners keep near their wood burners?
Okay, so it is now a building regulation that you should have a carbon monoxide alarm fitted if you've had a stove installed. It needs to be on the ceiling, a few meters away from the stove itself. The carbon monoxide alarm is a very good idea, even more than a smoke alarm, because a smoke alarm will obviously tell you if there's smoke coming out, or a heat alarm will tell you if you've got a fire or anything in your house. A carbon monoxide alarm will detect if your stove should be leaking for any reason. A properly installed stove on a good chimney won't leak smoke into your room. A properly working chimney is drawing air from your room through the stove and up. So it creates no particulates in the room itself.
So what role does ventilation play in fire safety? So we installed an 8 kilowatts wood burner in this room, and we had to put a ventilation hole into the actual building to allow ventilation to come through. Why does one have to do that?
A stove actually uses very little air. There's probably a hole the size of a 2p bit taking in the air when it's actually running. But it's got to be able to get air. And like I say, in modern airtight houses, this can be an issue. So there are regulations around, depending on the age of your house and the output of your stove. So a smaller stove in an old house won't be sucking much air, and there will be plenty of air coming into the house to feed that. But a bigger stove, an 8 kilowatt stove, if you're running that hard, you're sucking in quite a bit of air. And a modern house doesn't have that air leakage, so you need to put a vent in the wall. And that's not just a hole in the wall. That tube that's put in there has baffles in it, so you won't get drafts through. It's not blowing air through when there's a draw, there's a suck from the stove, it can get air there.
So are there any specific building regulations in the UK that homeowners need to follow when installing a wood-burning stove?
Very much so, yes. The building regs are very clear on what you need to follow to have a safe installation. Starting on the bottom, the stove should sit on a hearth of non-combustible material. Most modern stoves, it's sufficient if that hearth is 12 millimeters thick. So it can be a piece of slate, it can be a piece of stone, it could be even a piece of steel, but it's got to be non-combustible. It must extend 300 mil in front of the stove, so in front of the door, and at least 150 millimeters at the sides. Okay. Now you know that was anything to drop out of your stove, it's not landing on your carpet or your parquet floor, it's landing on something non-combustible. The other thing then to think about is the distance from the stove to anything that's combustible, any wood, and that's covered by the testing on the stove. Every model of stove will have particular distance to that it must be further away from combustible material. And then you've got to think about the chimney, particularly the first part of the chimney. Often you have a single skin flue length coming up from the stove. And that must be at least 3 times its diameter away from anything combustible. And the tricky point can come when you're going up past a wooden lintel before you go up your chimney. If it's a 150 mil flue, that's 450 mil. It's got to be away. That's you're unlikely to get that. So then you've got to bear in mind that back of that lintel must be shielded, and there are regulations now for how to shield the back of the lintel, or you just go up in twin wall flue, so that's insulated flue that can go within 50 mil of anything combustible, so that can get round that problem. A bit of black twin wall flue, that can look fine. Then the rest of the regulations are to do with requirements are to do with your chimney. And of course, the same, you're always following those same guidelines. It's the distance to anything combustible.
And finally, what's your top piece of advice for someone new to using a wood-burning stove in their new home?
Top piece of advice, play with it. Just play with it. See the different burns, try the different wood, try different ways of lighting it, get to know it. And I keep coming back to those flames, but get it so where you can see those flames dance above your wood. I always say it takes a season to get to know a stove, but you can walk through your front door and you can smell where your stove is. You're not smelling smoke, you're smelling heat. You know almost instinctively at what point in the burn cycle your stove is. You know whether you need to go and put more wood on it. You know whether it's happily running, ticking away, keeping your house warm. So use it and play with it, and you will get to know it, and it will work well for you.
Thank you, John, for those invaluable insights on fire safety. It's clear that with the right precautions, wood burners can be enjoyed safely and responsibly. For those tuning in, remember to follow the fire safety guidelines conduct regular maintenance, and ensure your home is well equipped for emergencies. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.